Sheltering in place for the last, year and a half, 3 years, 10 years. It's been a lot. It's been interesting for a lot of people who are accustomed to going into an office and having a hard distinction between work and home. I remember when I first started copywriting as a freelancer, I would work exclusively from home, and it was really, really difficult. I would think about work all the time. And if I didn't think about work during the workday, I felt bad and unproductive. It was a real catch-22 in that I felt bad when I was working and worse when I wasn't working. It was the worst of both worlds. But over time, I learned to just stop stressing so much about it. I rearranged my schedule so that I was working when I felt most productive, whether that was between 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. or outside of those hours. And if I wanted to take a break during those work hours, I would just do it and not feel bad about it. These days, I have things down pat. I start work around 8. I stop for a shower around 10. Then I work some more until 2. I take a break and goof off on Twitch. And then I go back to work for an hour or 2 maybe. But sometimes, inspiration hits at different times, and that's okay. And sometimes I need to take a few hours to go for a hike or work in the garden, and it's fine. I don't work 40 hours a week anymore, which at first made me feel really bad until I realized, why do I think 40 hours a week is necessary? The US had an average of 60 to 100-hour work weeks in the 19th century, and thanks to unions, that number came down to 40 hours in the 20s and 30s before being codified by Congress in 1940. But even that's arbitrary. Germany does about 26 hours per week. France does about 30. And let's be honest, when I worked 40 hours a week as a copywriter in an office, I spent a good deal of that time staring off into space, goofing off online, or planning elaborate pranks on coworkers. Like one time I got into a coworker's computer and I changed his autocorrect to make his name different. And he came up to me later in the day and asked if I knew why he had just sent an email to an important client and signed off his Pookie. Important stuff. As humanity has industrialized, we've developed more and more ways to reduce the amount of work we have to do in every aspect of our lives. Early 20th century thinkers like John Maynard Keynes predicted that industrialization would eventually lead to a 15-hour work week and people actually having way too much time on their hands. Like, oh no, how will we fill all of this leisure time? But culture is very difficult to change. Definitely doesn't change as quickly as technology. So we've decided that workers in 2021 should spend the same amount of time at work as those 100 years ago. Like, I'm a writer. 100 years ago, some poor ad copywriter would have to use a goddamn typewriter with no backspace. And then he'd have to walk his little sheet of paper into his boss's office for approval. And then he'd have to walk it over to the art department. And then they had to actually lay things out on a physical piece of paper instead of using InDesign, which having had to use InDesign, actually the physical piece of paper would probably be just as fast. But the point remains, if an 8-hour job in 1920 takes 2 hours now, why am I still expected to work 8 hours a day, 5 days a week? Why do people celebrate working even longer hours? Like this guy over on Twitter who brags about how he had to eat every meal at the office and pull all-nighters and a bunch of people got divorced just to make Internet Explorer. And more than that, why do I expect myself to do that sort of thing, even when I'm my own boss, setting my own hours? It's ridiculous. I'm not the only one who has struggled with this, as COVID has made crystal clear. Prior to the pandemic, a lot of corporations were resistant to the idea of allowing employees to work from home because those corporations could not keep an eye on those employees and make sure they're squeezing every last drop of work juice out of them between the hours of 9 and 5. Or 8 to 5, actually, considering the last 2 offices I worked in assumed your lunch hour was extra. But now that everyone is forced to work from home if they can, it turns out they're actually working more. One survey found that people in the UK, Austria, Canada, and the United States are working 2.5 hours more per day than they were before the pandemic. I've tried reading up on research that explores exactly why we, at least here in the US, are obsessed with the idea of productivity. But in order to even get to that research, I have to sort through 1,000 scientific papers and articles about how to be more productive. You can blame the religious if you want. There's the old Protestant work ethic. It's not just a saying, it's probably a real thing. It was coined by the German historian Max Weber, who described Protestants, particularly Calvinists, as transferring the idea of virtue and nobility from adherence to God to adherence to work and to productivity and ultimately to capitalism. And so 100 years on, here I am, a staunch atheist who still has this weird belief that work makes me good and not working is bad. Hardworking versus lazy, rich versus poor, motivated versus stagnant, hustling versus laying on the sofa watching Netflix. Those are my inherent beliefs that I've spent the past 15 years trying to remind myself aren't real. They aren't grounded in anything other than the culture in which I was raised. And this isn't a boomer thing or a Gen X thing. Millennials and Zoomers and whoever else is out there, they're all about the side hustle. Got an Instagram? Monetize it. Got a hobby? Well, now it's a job. And the undercurrent is always this. If you're not making capital, it's not truly virtuous. I mentioned earlier that part of my everyday is playing video games on Twitch. And I do it because every day around 2 p.m., I feel like I could use a break from reading scientific journals. So I play a game, usually Overwatch. And my handful of viewers at first tried to give me advice on how to build up my Twitch into being like a moneymaker. You know, stream for longer and more often, set up a bot and a Discord and play a more interesting game than Overwatch, or at least like get good at Overwatch. And honestly, I'm like, I don't want to. I just want to play this terrible game terribly. I don't want to do all those things because I don't want Twitch to be a job. I want it to be the thing I goof off on when I feel like it, to blow off some steam. I'm never going to be a famous Twitch streamer. That's fine. I don't care. But it's weird. Like, people have trouble understanding that because of this culture we live in where you can't just do something and be bad at it and not make money at it and just have fun. Like, what even is that? All of which is maybe the longest introduction I've ever given to the actual study that I'm going to talk about. Yeah, there is one. Viewing leisure as wasteful undermines enjoyment was published this week in the Journal of Experimental Social Psychology. And the conclusion is right there in the title, so I won't bury the lead any longer. Call it Protestant work ethic, call it capitalism, call it hustle, whatever you want, but it's making your downtime worse. In a series of 4 experiments, researchers found that people who think relaxing is a waste of time were less likely to actually get any enjoyment out of relaxing. To demonstrate causality, like this is causing that, they're not just related, they tried priming people to think that leisure time was wasteful before allowing them to relax. And they found that, yep, those people who were primed to think of relaxation as wasteful were less likely to enjoy their time relaxing. They even found that French people, who are much more likely than Americans to say that leisure time is a good thing, French people had the same exact results. Those French people who had a less rosy view of leisure time were less likely to enjoy it. And across the board, people who had a dim view of leisure had lower reported happiness and greater reported depression, anxiety, and stress. The research did reveal something that I think of as being a bit of a mental hack. People were more likely to view their leisure time as good and enjoyable if they thought it was productive in some way. And reading that, I realized I actually do that. I started bullet journaling a few years ago, and I mostly keep up with it. I find it helpful. And I found that if I write down leisure things along with my work goals on my daily to-do lists, it makes me feel better about doing them. So, one day it might be write a script for 2 videos, but then also read a few chapters of a book, or host a Patreon live stream, but also take the dog for a hike. Because those do further my goals, just not necessarily financial, capitalistic goals. Reading improves my brain. Hiking improves my physical fitness. Both of those things improve my mental health. And it's a little frustrating now to realize that I had to game my own idea of work ethic. Like, I haven't actually escaped from that mentality. I've just found a healthier way to deal with it. But, I guess that's something. So please keep this in mind as you continue to muddle through a global pandemic. There is nothing ethical about typing in an Excel document or waiting tables or writing copy or however else you produce capital for your boss. It's no less virtuous to watch a movie or take a bath or just be lazy. I don't know. If you work at it, you can escape the catch-22 of trying to relax but feeling bad about it. And that's right. I'm telling you to work hard at feeling good about not working hard. It's worth it. And that end goal should be enough to help carry you through.